Hey, this is Jeff from Christ Church. I'm glad that you've joined us for Church Online. If you'd like to communicate with us, there's a number to text at the bottom of the screen. You can send us an email or comment as this video progresses. We really would like to help you connect and answer any questions that you might have. It would also be helpful for us if you'd like or share this video. It really enables us to get the message out, the hope of Jesus and the good news that we have to more people. And so like and share, that's a big help. Kids Stuff is up and running on our different campuses at the Clay County campus in Flora or in Effingham. So if you're waiting for church to be fully engaged, well, it is. We'd love to welcome you back to Christ Church. Today's story, I think it's so relevant for you. The Good Samaritan, I think will help you understand how we respond to the needs of our world. So stay engaged as we begin worship today.
This world is not what it was meant to be. All this pain, all this suffering. There's a better place waiting for me in heaven. Every tear will be wiped away. Every sorrow in sin erased. We'll dance on seas of amazing grace in heaven. In heaven, I'm going home where the streets are golden, every chain is broken. Oh, I wanna go, oh, I wanna go home. Every fear is gone, I'm in your open arms where I belong. Lay down my burdens, I lay down my past. I run to Jesus, no turning back. Thank God Almighty, I'll be free at last. In heaven, I'm going home where the streets are golden, every chain is broken. Oh, I wanna go, oh, I wanna go home. Every fear is gone, I'm in your open arms where I belong. Blinded eyes, we finally see the dead we rise on the shores of eternity. The trumpet sound, the angel will sing, hallelujah, hallelujah. I am going home where the streets are golden, every chain is broken. Oh, I wanna go, oh, I wanna go home. Every fear is gone, I'm in your open arms where I belong. Where I belong. I'm going home. I'm going home. I'm on my way home. I'm going home. Through every battle, through every heartbreak, through every circumstance, I believe that you are my fortress, and you are my portion. You are my hiding place. It's a new horizon, and I'm set on you. And you meet me here today with mercies that are new. All my fears and doubts, they can all come to, because they can't stay long when I'm here with you. Oh, it's a new horizon, and I'm set on you. And you meet me here today with mercies that are new. All my fears and doubts, they can all come to, because they can't stay long when I believe you are the way, the truth, the life. I believe you are the way, the truth, the light. I believe you are. It's a new horizon, and I'm set on you. And you meet me here today with mercies that are new. All my fears and doubts, they can all come to, because they can't stay long when I believe you are the way, the truth, the light. I believe you are the way, the truth, the light. I believe you are. Oh, I believe you are.
I love you, Lord, for your mercy never fails me. All my days I've been held in your hands, from the moment that I wake up until I lay my head. Oh, I will sing of the goodness of God. And all my life you have been faithful. And all my life you have been so, so good. With every breath that I am able, oh, I will sing of the goodness of God.
one occasion, an expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. "Teacher," he asked, "what must I do to inherit eternal life?" "What is written in the law?" he replied. "How do you read it?" He answered, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and with all your mind. And love your neighbor as yourself." "You have answered correctly," Jesus replied. "Do this, and you will live." But the man wanted to justify himself, so he asked Jesus, "Who is my neighbor?" In reply, Jesus said, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he was attacked by robbers. They beat him, they stripped him, and they left him half dead on the side of the road. And along came a Levite who passed by on the other side. And then came a priest who also passed by on the other side. And then came a Samaritan who stopped, had pity on the man, bandaged his wounds, put him on his donkey, and took him to an innkeeper, where he offered to pay the bill in full." Jesus turned to the men and said, "So, which of these do you think was the neighbor?" Well, they're without any opportunity to escape the answer. To love the Lord your God and to love your neighbor as yourself means, if you see a man in need, you meet that need. That's how you love each other. That's how you love your neighbor. And that's how you love God.
Well, hey, welcome to Christ Church. I'm so glad you're joining us this weekend. I know several people join us throughout the week. Here's what I would love for you to do right now. I'd love for you to hit the share button on the bottom of your screen. Invite all of your online friends to join us for Church Online right now. When I was in college, I worked at a metal fabrication shop. I worked there in the summers and over Christmas break, and I had one job. I would take a shovel and I would pick up the metal chips on the ground and I'd put them in the bin to be recycled. I did the same thing over and over again, 8 hours a day. And here's what I learned during that experience. Are you ready for this? It's very spiritual. I hated it. I absolutely hated what I was doing. Now, I also learned another lesson that was more important than the first lesson, and it's this. People are really hard to love. There was a guy that I worked with who had the world's worst attitude. He literally hated everyone and he hated everything, and he would say things to me like, "Don't screw up, because if you screw up, I'm going to take you out back and I'm going to whip you." And when you're 18, 19, and 20, you have no idea what that means. One of the ladies in the office would always come to my rescue, and she would say, "Do that, and I will turn you inside out right now." It was like the craziest place to work. And I know some of you are thinking to yourself, that's where I work right now. You understand it. I hated working there, but I learned some really good lessons. Now, see, I grew up in church my entire life, and I knew and had been taught from a young child that I was to love my neighbor as myself, but often I would leave that place with my head low asking this question, who really is my neighbor? Which is really, in a way, asking the question like this, who do I actually have to love? How much do I actually have to love these people? See, this is a question that we wrestle with and a question that Jesus was asked in Luke chapter 10. Here's how the story of the Good Samaritan begins in verse 25. It says this, "On one occasion, an expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. 'Teacher,' he asked, 'what must I do to inherit eternal life?'" See, notice the context of the question. This guy is asking, how can he know with certainty that he will one day enter heaven? How can he know with certainty his final destination? See, this is the basis of all religious questions. This is a question that many people ask. I've sat across the table for many people as they've asked this question, how can I know with certainty that I'll one day end up in heaven? This is a natural question, and the reason it's a natural question is because God himself put this desire in our heart. Ecclesiastes 3 says that God has placed eternity in the human heart. Therefore, this question, to me, just makes sense. But the second reason this question is being asked in this way is really to understand the question behind the question, which is really to begin to understand that this is not a sincere question. He's truthfully asking this to set a trap. He's trying to test Jesus. And here's what happens. Verse 26, "What is written in the law?" he replied. In other words, you're the law expert. You tell me what's written in the law. How do you read it? He answered. "Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all of your strength and with all of your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself." Verse 28, "You have answered correctly," Jesus replied. "Do this and you will live." I almost laugh out loud when I read this response. Because Jesus does what he does all throughout the scriptures. When he's asked a question, he answers back with yet another question. This guy is an expert in the law. Chances are he has the law memorized. And what does he do? He responds by quoting Deuteronomy 6:5. And Jesus' response to him is, "Well, you've answered correctly. Now go and do it." And here's the problem. How do you command that? How do you command love? Because love is one of those things that you either do naturally or you don't. You don't need to be told to love something if you love it. For example, no one needs to tell me to love my wife or to love my kids. It's just something that I do naturally. But on the flip side, if you don't love something, no command can change that. Because love is one of those things that if you have it, you don't need to be commanded to do it. And if you don't have it, no command will change that. And there's the problem. Verse 29 says this, "But he wanted to justify himself. So he asked Jesus, 'Who is my neighbor?'" Notice what he's doing here. He's trying to justify himself by removing himself from the standard. Because his primary focus is still on himself, which presents a whole nother problem. If you think you have to earn your way to heaven, then every good thing that you do means you're operating out of self-interest. Because if you have to love in order to go to heaven, then loving is actually in a way of loving you. See, this is the problem with religion. It's that if I'm serving God as a way to earn my way to heaven, then I'm actually not loving God and I'm actually not loving people. I'm really loving me. This is the problem with religion. And the point of the life of Jesus and the point of the ministry of Jesus is that we couldn't earn it. We couldn't earn our way to heaven. Therefore, Jesus came to earth to live the life that we couldn't live. He came to die the death that we were supposed to die. See, all of these things are at play in this question. And Jesus is about to tell a story that's going to flip everything upside down and turn the focus of the conversation around. He's about to show us what it means to love our neighbor. And most importantly, he's about to show us how we actually love our neighbor. In verse 30, it says this, "In reply, Jesus said to him, 'A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho.'" It's important for us to know that he's actually going down. This is roughly a 15 to 17 mile journey. There's about a 3,000-foot elevation drop here. He's literally going down when he was attacked by robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down the same road. And when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. Remember here that Jesus is communicating to a Jewish audience. And as they're hearing this story, they're picking up on a whole list of things that you and I are missing. The first thing that they're picking up on is that this was a dangerous road. You can see in some of the footage that this is a desolate place. People referred to this road and this journey as the Pass of Blood, because it was a natural place for robbers to hide along the side of the road. And one thing was very true, and everyone knew it. If you had to travel on this road, you never stopped for anything or for anyone. The second thing that this audience is picking up on is that this priest was coming from Jerusalem. He had just purified himself. That would have been the reason that he went to Jerusalem in the first place. He is returning to his hometown to perform religious duties. And according to Jewish law, if he had stopped and touched this man, he would have now been spiritually unclean, meaning he would have had to go through the ceremonial washing and the cleansing process, which could have taken up to 7 days. Here's the point of what's happening here. If he would have stopped, this would have been incredibly inconvenient. It would have been incredibly dangerous, incredibly expensive. So he thinks to himself, someone else is going to have to deal with this. And he passes by on the other side. This one is so hard for me to read. Because if anyone should have stopped, it should have been the religious priest, am I right? He passes by. Verse 32 says this, so too a Levite. It's important for us to know that the Levites were like junior priests. They were of the priestly clan and the priestly line, but they were not full priests. They were to priests what like mall security is to police officers. They're junior priests. But so too this Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, he passed by on the other side. He passes by on the other side. Verse 33, but a Samaritan, as he traveled, came where the man was. And when he saw him, he took pity on him. Notice here that Luke starts with what he feels, not with what he does. He has pity on him. He has compassion on him. See, Samaritans were the sworn enemy of the Jews. Jews regarded Samaritans to be unclean because Samaritans were the half-Jew, half-Gentile offspring of a group of people called the Assyrians. They had conquered the northern part of the kingdom, forcing the Jews to intermarry. The Samaritans retaliated by saying that they were actually the true people of God because they lived in the land of Joseph. If you know anything about the Bible, you know that Joseph in the Old Testament is like the stud. He's the hero. They told these people that because they were from this land that they were actually the true people of God. They even set up a place of worship, an altar. But to the Jewish people, the only good Samaritan was actually a dead Samaritan. And to the Samaritan people, the only good Jew was a dead Jew. And what happened is it created incredible racial tension. It created fear. It created anxiety. It created anger. Does that sound like anything else you've seen on the news in the last few months? That's what's going on in this story. He sees a man in need. Verse 34, he went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine. Then he put the man on his donkey, which means he would have had to walk the remainder of the journey. He brought him to an inn and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 denarii and gave it to the innkeeper and said, look after him, he said. And when I return, I will reimburse you for any extra expense you may have. This guy has opened up a line of credit at the hospital for this man. Jesus turns to the expert in the law, and here's what he says to him in verse 36. Which of these 3 do you think was the neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of robbers? He says this, the expert in the law replied, the one who had mercy on him. Notice that he can't even say the word Samaritan. Jesus looks at him and says, go and do likewise. Jesus shows these people and he shows us what it looks like to love our neighbors. But first, let's answer the question that the religious leader, the expert in the law, asked Jesus, and it's this: who actually is my neighbor? And the answer to the who is very simple: anyone we see in need. See, the Samaritan and the Jew couldn't have had less in common. And I think it's natural for us as human beings to really be in a place of being willing to take care of people who are exactly like us. We're willing to help people who identify with us, people that have the same views as us. But Jesus is teaching us here that we're to help people who are not like us. He says that we're even to help people that are our enemy, people that have wronged us. And here's what that means for us. That means it's the person who you hardly know. Now, this one's going to sting a little bit, but it's the person that's on the other side of the political aisle than you are. It's the person that is suffering because of the mistakes that they've made. It's the person that doesn't look like you. It's the person that's in a total different economical situation than you. When we see someone made in the image of God, we're not asking the question how they got there. We're simply saying that we're going to help. We're going to love like Jesus has loved. And so the answer to the who is really simple. Anyone we see in need. What about the when? When are we supposed to help? As I was preparing for our conversation, I started writing down the excuses that I think we use when it comes to meeting the needs of people. And understand that it was very easy for me to pick out the things that I've said and I've done. And so as I'm sharing these, understand that I'm talking to me as well. And the very first one is one that I've had a lot of trouble with in the past, and it's this. I'd help, but I don't know anyone that has a need. I'd help, but I don't know anyone that has a need. And let me just say it this way. If that is your response to this question, I would urge you to open up your eyes and your ears and your heart to the people that are around you. Because to answer this question in this way is to say that I care about me more than I care about anyone else. I'm all about my needs and what I want, and I've blinded myself to the needs of people around us. And let me just say it very simply. The answer to this question cannot be, I don't know anyone in need. Because we live in a world and in a culture where there are people in need all around us. Open up your eyes to the people who need you. The second one that I wrote down is this. We only help people who are in real need. Which really violates this principle of loving our neighbor as ourselves. And here's why. Because we come to our own rescue far before anyone else. For example, I don't wait till I'm near death to call a doctor. I call a doctor when I begin to be uncomfortable. We don't help people who are just in real need. We help people when we're made aware of the need. The third thing that I wrote down is I'd help, but they brought this upon themselves. My answer to that question would be, didn't Christ save us from the sin that we brought on ourselves? Should we not then help people like Christ has helped us? Should we not love them like Christ has loved us? And just to be totally clear and upfront with you, here's what I want you to understand. Loving people does not mean agreeing with their lifestyle. I tell people all the time when I have to have awkward conversations with them about the way they're living is that I'm having this conversation with you because I actually care about you. I love you, and what I'm doing to you, I would expect for you to do to me. If I didn't love you, I would just let you live your life however you want it to live. I love what Proverbs 3:27 says. It says this, never walk away from someone who deserves help. Your hand is God's hand for that person. We are the hands and feet of Jesus, and when we see someone in need, we meet the need, regardless of how they got there. Another one I wrote down is this, I'd help, but I've got a lot of my own issues. I can hardly make ends meet on my own. I can't afford to help someone who is in need. To which I immediately thought of Galatians 6, which says that we are to bear each other's burdens. Meaning that we are to live and give in a way that brings someone else's burden on ourselves. This is what the story of the Good Samaritan is all about. He brought this man's burden on himself. Listen, I cannot give you the magic number of how much you are to give of your time and of your money. But what I can tell you is this, that if you're a follower of Jesus, you are to give and to live in a way that shares the burden of the people that are around you. I think that's why C.S. Lewis said it this way: when it comes to generosity, we had better give more than we think we can spare. One of the dangers that you and I face, one of the dangers that we face is getting so caught up in our comfort that we ignore our commission. We get so caught up in the comfort of our life, the comfort of it being all about us, that we forget the commission that God has placed in our life to seek and to save those that are lost, to help people, to love people who are totally different than we are. Because when we see a need, and when we have the ability to meet that need, friends, we had better take action. We had better take on responsibility and meet the needs of people. This is what Jesus is about to take aim at when he answers the why. Why do we love our neighbor as ourselves? This is where Jesus turns the conversation literally upside down. Now think about this. Why would he have to use a Samaritan as the hero of this story? Why would he not use another Jew to be the hero? He didn't need the Samaritan to be the hero. Why would he do that? I think he did it for two reasons. First, you have to remember that Jesus is talking to a group of Jewish people. There's lots of ears that are listening to him, and I think he takes it as an opportunity for a teachable moment. A moment to remind every ear and every heart that is listening that his kingdom is not just for one group of people, it's for all people. His kingdom is for everyone. And second, what if the person that we're supposed to identify in this story with is not the priest, it's not the Levite, and it's also not the Good Samaritan? This is where people get this story completely wrong. It's not the Good Samaritan, but rather, what if we are to identify with the person who is bleeding and left for dead on the side of the road? And what if someone that had every right to hate us, had every reason to consider us his enemy, what if someone like that was to take on our burden? What if that person was to walk along the path that we had put ourselves on? What if that person was Jesus? What if the Good Samaritan in this story is actually Jesus, who puts himself in our shoes, puts himself on our path, takes on our burden to take away our suffering that we have caused ourselves? Jesus is asking this man, what if you were bleeding on the side of the road and your only hope was an act of free grace from an enemy who didn't know you anything? And after you were rescued, how would you live your life? My guess is that we would live our life totally different. See, Jesus is not giving this teacher a new rule as much as he is waking him up to a new reality. He's saying, listen, even on your very best day, you are still not as good as this Good Samaritan, because this Good Samaritan is Jesus. See, if we understand that if we could live our life in the way that Christ has loved us, I think we would live our life totally different. I think we would live our life as a way of grace upon grace, to live our life in a way that we have been given, this free gift of grace. See, I think here's what this conversation for this man, here's what it's doing for him. Here's what Jesus is teaching him, and I think here's what he's teaching us, that the gospel begins when you and I end. That the gospel begins when you and I end, because the good news of Jesus, when it comes alive in our life, and we realize that we literally bring nothing to the table, if we get there, I think it will totally change the way we live. Because unlike this religious teacher of the law, we love because we have been loved. That's why we love. In this story, Jesus has given us the who. He's given us the when, and he's given us the why, but more importantly, he's giving us the how. How do we love our neighbor as ourself? There are a few things that jump off the page in application for us. And the first may sound a little bit weird, but I think when you begin to understand it, you'll begin to realize that it's here. The first thing that we need in the how is we need faith. We need faith. See, fear was the primary reason that the priest and the Levite passed by on the other side. And what is the opposite of fear? It's faith. It's courage. See, I would suggest that fear is the primary thing that keeps us from loving our neighbor as ourselves. We often ask the question, what would this do to my family? What would this do to my family if I brought a stranger into my life and into my home? When my wife and I were dating, she and I were getting pretty serious, and she set me down one time and she just said, hey, I really feel like someday God is going to call me to adopt. And if you're not into that, and you don't feel like God's calling you to that, then, hey, this is your free pass to get out of this relationship. And I got to tell you, I would have said anything at that moment to get her to marry me, so I'm just kidding. But the last 18 months or so, we've walked through this journey of starting an adoption process. And it's been hard, and it's been a challenge, and the kids aren't even home. We've watched all of our friends and many people on our staff walk down this journey, and it's given us some courage. It's given us some reassurance that God can make this happen. But it wasn't until the moment where I realized that the greatest thing that I could provide for my family wasn't safety, but it was to teach my kids to love everyone, even people who are different than them. Which means entering into relationships that aren't safe, which means entering into relationships that are hard and difficult, because God has not called us as his people to the picket fence. He's called us to people. And people are messy. And people are not safe. And relationships are hard. And we need faith to walk through some of the most difficult situations and the most difficult relationships that we would ever encounter here on this earth with people who are broken and people who need help. The next thing that I think we need is margin. Now, what could be said of every one of us is that we spent 3 months or so walking through a season of life where we had more margin than we've maybe ever had in our life. And it was incredible to sit back and watch as people from our church and our community met the needs of people that they just saw. We sprung into action. And why did we spring into action? I think it's because we had a little bit more time. We saw the need. We had margin in our life. But what happened the moment that we went back to just a glimpse of normal? What happened? We slipped back into busyness. Less and less margin in our life. See, I think for a lot of us, the problem isn't our heart. The problem is our calendar. And what could be said about our life is that we're just too busy to respond when someone puts someone in our life to minister to. For some of us, the application here is to really audit our life. Because this is about relationships, and relationships take time. And just to be clear, I'm not talking about serving and unleashing compassion on the person that is holding a sign on the street that says, I'm hungry. Certainly, if you do those things, God will bless those things. But this story is really about relationship, because this Samaritan says what? I will come back. Now, relationships are hard and they take time, but you need to know that this is the core of our church. A group of people that are sent from here into our neighborhoods, sent into our workplaces, our schools, and wherever God is sending you, to build relationships with people who are not like you. This parable is quite simply about the heart. That is what it means to love people. We want to be known for who we love. We want to spend our energy and our focus talking about who we're for rather than who we are against. I cannot tell you how many times in the last few weeks I have been asked through Facebook messages, text messages, our phone calls, where does our church stand on some of the issues that are happening in our culture? To which I answer that question in the very same way. Our stance has never changed. Jesus is for everyone, and because he is for everyone, we are for everyone. Because the greatest issue in our world isn't skin, it's sin. It's sin, and because of that, by the grace of God, we're going to mobilize our church into communities with the love of Jesus Christ. That is why, by God's grace, we're going to give away $100,000+ in 2020 to mission partners all around the world. Because the message of grace and the message of Jesus Christ is the most relevant and most urgent message in the history of the world. We will not be silent about it. We will give our money to it. We will devote our lives to it. We are not perfect, but we are determined to love people like Jesus has loved us. We aren't here to survive the world. We're here to help transform the world with the message of Jesus Christ, because that's who we are. Because that is who God has called us to be as His people. Love everyone always. That is who we are, and that is what we do. Father, I pray that you would awaken us to the needs of people that are around us. God, that you would clear our schedule, that you would clear our heart, that you would allow us to meet the needs of people, Father, because that's who we are. Unleashing compassion isn't just something that we do, it's who we are at the core of our church. This is who we are as followers of Jesus Christ. And Father, I pray that we would understand that we love because we have first been loved by you. Father, it is in your name that we pray. Amen.
Let's take a little bit of time as we wrap up our worship today to think about communion and our response. I hope if you're watching this alone at home or with your family or with a live group that you do take the time to participate in communion. So after I share a thought with you, go and get some elements, think about what we've talked about, pray about it, and remember Jesus in this way as we do that together. Now, today's thought is just really simple from the story. Jesus said that the way we show our love of God and our love of people is by helping those who have needs. You know, that's exactly what He did for us. We love because He first loved us. He saw our need, really the need that only He could meet, the need of the separation that's created in our life because of sin, the need to fix that, to restore us to God. And He offered Himself as a perfect sacrifice to meet our greatest need, that we could have hope of eternal life. Contemplate that today as you partake of communion. Thanks for joining us for worship.